Divers working on a submarine project in McDonald Lake in the Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve, Ontario, Canada, discovered a submerged man-made ancient stone structure, possibly 5,000 to 10,000 years old. For some, this is irrefutable evidence of a long-lost civilization that inhabited the region before the last ice age. One or two researchers have linked the discovery to Canada's Stonehenge, a huge 5,000-year-old stone wheel discovered south of Alberta. Who were the people who constructed these mysterious monuments, and what do they represent? The Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve Limited is a privately owned forest comprising 120 square miles in Halliburton County, Ontario, Canada. The owner and manager of the 25,000-hectare Halliburton Forest is Dr. Peter Schliffenbaum, who inherited it from his father. Recently, various sources on the net carried a story about a submarine survey of McDonald Lake, a popular tourist attraction which apparently took place in 2008. According to the story, during the survey, divers encountered an ancient stone structure which was thought to be proof of the presence of a mysterious ancient culture in the area, life from central Ontario ancestors. Staff at the Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve would often see this unusual stone structure balanced on the top of a rock ledge at a depth of about 40 feet below the present lake level, whilst in the tour submarine, which was in existence for a few years at the site. The structure consists of a 1,000-pound elongated, south-pointing rock sitting on a baseball-sized stone at each side, which in turn rested on a massive slab. Initially, the structure was considered a complex version of a glacial erratic, rocks carried by glaciers thousands of years ago and left where they happened to melt at the end of one of the recent ice ages. However, when various geologists and archaeologists examined images on the subject, some expressed doubts about its natural origin. Their main objection was that the structure has straight edges rather than rounded, which would normally characterize rocks scoured by glaciers. One alternative was that the mysterious structure was man-made, but the problem was, how could that be established? The Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve Limited decided to hire an underwater archaeologist to examine the structure more closely. Apparently, after a brief examination of the structure, this unnamed archaeologist concluded that it was undoubtedly the result of human activity rather than an accident of nature. The company also employed a statistician to calculate the probability of these 7 rocks in the lake falling on top of each other to create what looked like a structure. The statistician determined that the probability of 7 rocks falling into such positions at the right time and place was almost impossible. But if the structure was man-made, what was it? Who built it and when? Some researchers think it resembled the prehistoric stone cairns found throughout the world, which serve as monuments, burial sites, markers for ceremonial land, or even navigational aids. Others think it may be a burial chamber or perhaps a dolmen. Dolmens are a type of single-chamber megalithic tomb, mostly dating from the early Neolithic 4000 to 3000 BC, found in a variety of places throughout the world, but mostly in northwest Europe, particularly in the region of Brittany, France, Britain and Ireland. The thick layer of silt covering some of the surfaces of the structures indicate that they are very old, but beyond that, without further evidence, it was impossible to say when it was built. However, when geologists were consulted on the matter, they apparently pointed to a drought which may have hit eastern North America between 9000 and 7000 BC. At this time, conditions were so dry that water levels in the Great Lakes were as much as 165 feet lower, and inland lakes like McDonald Lake may well have been at least 40 feet lower than their current levels. If the structure of the McDonald Lake is a prehistoric monument of some kind, why was it situated in such a remote place? One theory is that the sparse local population at the time may have been attracted to the spot by lake trout, often described as glacial relics, as they are a holdover from the Ice Age and live mainly in deep, cold water habitats. One geologist suggested that in prehistoric times, McDonald Lake was not a lake at all, but part of an ancient river system, which made an ideal habitat for the trout. But no prehistoric monuments of the cairn or dolmen type exist in the USA, Canada, or anywhere else in the world dated to anywhere near 9,000 to 7,000 BC. Does that make this structure the oldest in the world, or should the glacial erratic theory be examined further? However attractive these explanations for the Lake McDonald structure being a prehistoric monument are, without further evidence obtained in an independent study or excavation unconnected with the Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve Limited, such as contemporary artifacts or signs of man-made tooling marks on the stones, we cannot say this for sure. There are one or two researchers who have linked the underwater structure at Lake McDonald to a mysterious monument known as Canada's Stonehenge. This would make the Lake McDonald prehistoric structure later in date, say around 3000 BC, though still unique to the area. In his 2008 book, Canada's Stonehenge: Astounding Archaeological Discoveries in Canada, England and Wales, author Gordon R. Freeman puts forward the theory that the ancient structure is a prehistoric calendar. A summary of the book on Freeman's website states, "The discovery of a 5,000-year-old sun temple and an ancient time machine, Stone Age calendar, in Canada led scientist Gordon Freeman to groundbreaking discoveries in Stonehenge. During fieldwork and research from 1986 to 2006, Freeman found striking similarities between the surface geometry of the two sites. These similarities push back the boundaries of written history and have far-reaching implications for North American and European history." Could the same mysterious ancient cultures have built Canada's Stonehenge and the Lake McDonald structure? Perhaps they were both related to ancient astronomical observations. Freeman describes what he discovered at the ancient site of Canada's Stonehenge, located in Vulcan County, Alberta, in his book. "I had found an amazingly accurate year-round calendar in this sun temple, marked with rock lines pointing to sunrises and sets at critical dates. I later learned of arguments going on, mainly negative, about whether Stonehenge contained marked observation lines to the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset. By applying what I had learned in Alberta to observing sunrises and sets through Stonehenge, I found that an accurate, entire year-round calendar exists in Stonehenge." The term Canada's Stonehenge refers to the monument known by archaeologists and historians as Majorville Medicine Wheel. There are between 70 and 150 Native American stone structures known as medicine wheels spread over the northern United States and southern Canada. Though each individual structure is unique, the shape of the most common type of medicine wheel resembles that of a wagon wheel lying on its side, with a central cairn from which lines of cobblestone radiate outwards to a surrounding ring of stones. The diameter of medicine wheels, as well as the number and length of their spokes, varies. The largest so far discovered has a diameter of around 80 feet. Occasionally, there will be a break in the outer stone circle to allow a stone pathway or entrance into the center of the structure, and sometimes one of the spokes can be considerably longer than the others, perhaps signifying the importance of the direction in which it's pointing. The dates of these medicine wheels also vary considerably, but it is acknowledged that the oldest so far investigated is the Majorville Medicine Wheel, which was started around 5,500 years ago. There is no doubt that the wheel may have served some astronomical function, but it is more probable that this would have been part of a wider ritual use, perhaps involving hunting magic or buffalo fertility. This is not to say that Native Americans were not sophisticated enough to build observatories, far from it, but in one sense, to state that the Majorville Medicine Wheel was built only to make complex astronomical calculations is to apply modern Western ideas from a 21st century technology-dominated era back into the past. This explanation reflects our own concerns with timekeeping, calendars, computers and space, not necessarily those of the Native Americans who built and used Canada's Stonehenge. To most people, the idea of a zombie outbreak taking place among the world's population belongs in the realms of science fiction. And for the most part, that would be correct. The fact is, however, although it might look different to how it is portrayed in the movies, the potential of a zombie outbreak in the real world is not as far-fetched as we may think. The origins of many accounts of zombies reside in many of the ancient voodoo legends and rituals of the indigenous tribes of Africa. As the slave trade ripped people from their homeland and distributed them around the world, these legends and rituals came with them. Many of these legends flourished in the southern regions of the United States, particularly in Louisiana, where there's a long history of voodoo and magic rituals, including the ability to turn a person into a zombie. Another location that saw claims of zombies increase over the decades is Haiti, although rather than voodoo, the practice here is known as hoodoo. What's more, many of these accounts and claims can be found in our modern era, with the belief in zombies being widespread in the country. And it's to some of these claims that we'll turn our attention to next. One person who has researched claims of zombies in Haiti more than most is Zorex Neil Hurston, who spent years in the 1920s and 30s speaking with locals, as well as hoodoo priests. In fact, she would become so trusted by the people at the time that she was invited on several occasions to witness some of the hoodoo rituals up close. It was during one of these rituals that she claimed to have seen a dead woman named Felicia Felix Mentor brought back from the dead. She would state in her book, Tell My Horse, that the woman had a blank face with dead eyes and was a truly dreadful sight. Ultimately, Hurston would claim that zombies in Haiti were very real and that she herself had seen people called back from the dead. In more recent times, in the 1980s, Harvard University's Wade Davis spent considerable time in Haiti studying the legends and rituals of zombies. And like Hurston, he too spent considerable time with hoodoo priests, as well as researching the ancient roots of the rituals they would perform. He would claim, for example, that in ancient times, criminals would be turned into zombies as punishment for their crimes. This was largely done, David offered, by the use of ancient toxic herbs, plants and powders. These practices, he would claim, were still carried out today, albeit unofficially, although the makeup of the natural toxins remained a secret to the hoodoo priests only. There were some claims, although none with any proof, that the military took an interest in the notion that a person could be turned into a zombie through the use of natural toxins, something which is perhaps not that much of a stretch of the imagination. As much as an intentional mix of toxic ingredients could very well turn a person into a zombie, according to the research of Peter Cummings from Boston University, the conditions of the planet are potentially perfect for a virus to mutate and take hold among the human population that could then create zombies. Cummings would specifically offer that should a virus mutate in such a way that it affected the frontal lobe of the brain and shut it down, then this would return the mindset to a primal one, essentially a zombie-like state. While this might sound far-fetched and highly unlikely, there are incidents on record during the time of the Spanish flu, where some patients mysteriously deteriorated into a catatonic-like state until any type of interaction with another person, which would result in an almost attack-like response. Maybe our understanding of the potential possibilities of a zombie outbreak in the human population would be increased by examining such cases in the animal world. Many of these cases involve parasites entering the food chain of a specific insect, for example, which in turn enters the insect's nervous system. This results in the parasite taking control of its movements and actions. In a bizarre twist, in some cases, these movements are designed so that the insect will itself be eaten by a larger animal, and so the parasite travels even further. Of course, this alone, potentially at least, could mean such a zombie-causing parasite could enter our own food chain, either directly or indirectly. That this zombie-like state exists in the animal world is well documented, and without doubt, it's certainly food for thought. We mentioned earlier how the possibility of viruses mutating and creating, for all intents and purposes, zombies. However, it's a notion that is worth examining a little further, not least as it's much more of a realistic, if unlikely, possibility than most of us might think. As Samita Andriansky from the University of Miami states, it would only take a virus such as rabies to mutate to result in someone showing symptoms that many would associate with zombification. And these dire warnings were compounded by the knowledge that should such a virus mutate in such a way, it would very likely rip through the global population. Essentially, it could very well cause a global zombie outbreak. Another idea that might at first sound like it comes out of a science fiction movie is a zombie-causing virus could arrive on Earth from outer space. While that is indeed extremely unlikely, it is certainly not impossible that a bacteria or virus from elsewhere in the solar system, or even the universe, could find its way to our planet and then mutate and spread. Some researchers have even proposed that such a zombie-causing virus existing in the reaches of space could be the reason that aliens haven't visited Earth, such as Stephen Kane of San Francisco State University. Indeed, as unlikely as it might be, such a possibility is a grim and sobering one. Although it is perhaps equally unlikely, we might also consider the notion that a zombie outbreak could intentionally be induced by one intelligence agency or another, possibly through a combination of drugs and mind control techniques. We know, for example, that the CIA spent considerable time looking at such ideas as mind control in their MK Ultra program. Could it be possible, if such knowledge was at their disposal, that future wars could be fought and won by turning the enemy into zombies and so rendering them unable to fight? While that might indeed seem like stuff of science fiction movies, one thing we can be sure of is, if it was something at a military's disposal, they would almost certainly use it. Although there is most likely a rational explanation, in 2011 a gentleman by the name of Gordon Lubold would reveal leaked classified United States military documents that appeared to lay out a military response to a zombie outbreak. Given that the documents were now in the public arena, the military saw fit to issue an official response. They would state that such terms as evil zombies was, in fact, a reference for any particular target, which made the document adaptable for multiple situations they might wish to train for. There was also the issue of not wanting to highlight any particular target for foreign relations purposes. What should we make of this explanation? Does it make sense? Or might there really be a plan to deal with a literal zombie outbreak? It's believed that all or maybe most living beings on our planet are well known and studied in detail by biologists, but this is not the case. Scientists are studying only one form of life on our planet, the protein life, but there is another life which is a cluster of the physical field. You look up at the sky on a clear day and it seems that it's absolutely clear, but it lives its own life invisible to people. It's literally teeming with strange objects, visible only in the bright rays of the sun. The whole sky is filled with them. Interestingly, objects are said to move only in one direction, bottom to top, with different angles at different speeds. The sizes of the objects are also different, but the speed of movement is very fast. The flight path of objects, as well as the speed with which they move, makes it possible to exclude the possibility that these are plant seeds or insects, according to some Russian researchers who were trying to film them not that long ago. Millions of strange objects are not visible to the human eye. Even a video camera is only able to see them if they are illuminated by the rays of the sun. What are they? Perhaps these are so-called plasmoids. Plasmoids are an energetic form of life that exists on Earth in parallel with the human civilization. This is a plasma system structured by its own magnetic field. Plasma is hot ionized gas. An example of this is ordinary fire. Plasma has the ability to dynamically interact with the magnetic field to keep the field in itself, and the field in turn orders the chaotic motion of charged plasma particles. Under certain conditions, a stable but dynamic system consisting of a plasma and a magnetified field can form. There is a hypothesis that plasmoids are one of the life forms that have existed on our planet for billions of years. In Western Europe, legends have been circulating since ancient times about fires that paralyzed the consciousness of a person and taken them away with it. Some researchers believe that the glowing spheres may have an alien origin. Human beings have encountered this life since their appearance on Earth, but we still know very little about them. If human beings can be called a ruler of the surface of the Earth, then according to some Russian researchers, this non-protein life can rightly be called the rulers of the planet's bowels and the sky above. The creatures that inhabit the Earth's firmament and sometimes break out of it into the sky possess varying names, but they have the same essence. In ancient times, they were considered the embodiment of the element of fire. Fire elementals, most often in historical chronicles with these elements of fire, appear as fire spheres. There was a Roman historian, Ammianus Marcellinus, and he described the appearance of the fire elementals in the year 362 AD or Common Era. Fireballs descended from the sky and burned all the workers who were trying to restore the temple in Jerusalem. Ammianus Marcellinus was born around 330 to 400 AD or Common Era. He was one of the last of the great Latin pagans historians of antiquity. He spoke about Jews in 4 separate passages of the history. The first one refers to Pompey's conquest of Jerusalem. In the second, he quotes the disparaging remarks of Marcus Aurelius regarding the Jewish people. But most importantly is the third passage, which contains a description of the attempt of Julian the Apostate to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. He ascribes that this is not due to sympathy with the Jews, but because of the emperor's desire to leave a memorial to his reign. According to Marcellinus, the project was entrusted to a certain Alypius of Antioch, but it couldn't be executed because of an explosion of balls of fire on the Temple Mount. Julian the Apostate, Flavius Claudius Julianus, lived in the Common Era. He was a Roman emperor, and the story is extremely interesting, but in the 20th century descriptions of elementals took on a much more mundane appearance. But also, more specific, they were even captured on video camera. For example, on September the 12th at 9 o'clock in the evening, near the Russian village of Basia, Udoli, the car of Dmitry Regan, a paranormal researcher, got stuck in the mud. The researcher himself described his encounter with a fiery creature. The fireballs sometimes moved slightly away behind low clouds and hung against the background of an almost black sky. It was about a third of the size of the moon's disk, but it didn't change shape, its size to the optics of the TV camera. You could see its loose structure like cells of different shapes and sizes. I calmly filmed it for about 20 minutes. Fireballs floating in the air are common on Earth, but not ubiquitous. They definitely love some areas, and in those areas, the fireballs sometimes arrange real parades. Shigli became one of such zones favored by these fiery objects. The Shigli Mountains, or simply Shigli, are a range of wooded mountains located in Russia on the right bank of the Volga River inside the Samara Band. The Shigli are considered the only tectonically active mountains in eastern Russia. That's important. First having formed around 7 million years ago, the summits and other exposed areas of the Shigli are composed of limestone and dolomite sediments laid down 230 to 350 million years ago in the Permian and Carboniferous regions. For several years in a row, Samara, that's a city in Russia, a group of local historians came here to collect stories of local residents about their encounters with fiery entities. Local historians were lucky on one of the summer nights that they actually saw a real air parade over Shigli. Here's what one of the participants of the expedition wrote in his diary on August the 15th, 1990. At about 22 hours, I, as well as several of my comrades, observed a group of fireballs flying over the Shigli. Ahead of the group flew a large single ball with a small tail, followed by 9 smaller balls of spheres. They flew in a row of 3, shimmering with bright and long tails. Many of them believe that the fire elementals do not exist, and poetic stories about meeting with strange fiery objects that behave like living beings or are inspired by ancient myths and fairy tales, or just eyewitnesses of such meetings for the first time saw very ordinary ball lightning. Here's how the Canadian professor Michael Persinger explains the appearance of fire objects, balls and pillars. In the course of natural processes from a scientific point of view, these are fire objects that frighten people. They're born underground. Even very weak tectonic movements lead to mechanical stresses in siliceous rocks. Electricity is generated, which given their huge mass, can reach a significant value. Under its influence, a column of ionized air over the section of rocks can twist around the axis. As a result, it creates ball lightning bolts that have sizes from a few centimeters to 1 to 2 meters. Maybe what witnesses had seen over the tectonically active Shigi was that, but you see, not all the appearances of fireballs can be explained by natural causes. Russian researchers of the unknown who followed the mission Kazanachev have long been talking about the possibility of the existence of beings on our planet. The basis of life for these beings are energy fields. It's likely that the energy life forms were able to reach a high level of their development and are not predatory jellyfish floating in the oceans of air, but actually intelligent beings. In some Eastern mystical manuscripts that have come down to our time, for example, in a ball of fire, it's said that the existence on Earth of intelligent races that do not have a solid body, but are fire clusters. Russian researchers say that we must accept the idea that on Earth we don't know protein nucleic life well enough as energy beings can exist next to it. Moreover, encounters with them can end in tragedy. True, they can exist only in energetically active areas of the planet, in conditions of constant energy supply, primarily in places where powerful electromagnetic currents reach the Earth's surface, for example in the magnetic poles of the planet. Yuri Kashinov, a member of the Soviet expedition to the South Pole, recalled his meeting with such creatures. Kashinov lived in Leningrad. Shortly before his death, he told a journalist a story that he had kept secret for a long time. There's no wonder, because for such things in the USSR they were forbidden. If you did, you were put in a mental asylum. In 1959, the Soviet expedition that established the Mir station in Antarctica sent a group of 6 explorers deep into the continent to reach the South Magnetic Pole. Only 2 of them returned. In the end, Kashinov recalled, they decided to tell the truth about what had happened. To his surprise, they believed them, but there was no convincing evidence. So what happened in 1959? The Soviet expedition for 3 weeks reached the South Magnetic Pole, and everything was going too well, Kashinov recalled. Troubles began for the expedition the next morning. 300 meters away from the all-terrain vehicle, a glowing ball jumped out of nowhere. The photographer of the expedition, Alexander Garadetsky, went forward with a camera in his hand. A glowing halo appeared around Garadetsky, and he screamed horribly. 2 shots rang out, and the group's senior officer, Andrei Kobylev, and the expedition's doctor, Rauman Kustov, were the ones who fired at the glowing ribbon. It swelled, sparks flew in all directions, and it disappeared with an explosion. Garadetsky lay dead. The back of his head, hands and back were charred. The glowing orbs reappeared on the path 2 days later. They appeared suddenly at an altitude of about 100 meters, then slowly descended, approaching the team. Kustov and Borissa started firing their rifles, and when Kashinov recovered from the shock, the balloon orbs were gone, and there was a smell of ozone in the air, as if after a severe thunderstorm. Kustov and Borissa lay dead in the snow, and the commander of the detachment, Andrei Kobylev, stood with his hands pressed to his eyes. He couldn't remember anything and didn't see anything, and sadly died on his return to the Mir station. Does the mythology of the Wajina tribes in Australia offer proof of the ancient astronaut theory? Creation stories about sky beings from the clouds and cave paintings that look like typical grey aliens of our modern world have some people convinced this is very much the case. Could there be more truth to the notion that extraterrestrials landed in what we recognize today as Australia and sparked the Wandjina tribes. And were these extraterrestrials the gods in the creation stories and myths of these indigenous people? The three Wandjina tribes, the Wurrara, the Nagarinyin, and the Wunabul, had a history that went back thousands and thousands of years, and was one that was uncontaminated by the outside world until the late 18th century, when the arrival of European explorers on the shores of Australia occurred. And perhaps because of this, the creation stories and legends of the Wandjina are particularly thought-provoking. Without a doubt, one of the most compelling reasons to contemplate whether the tribe's roots go back to extraterrestrial contact in ancient times is some of the cave paintings that reside in the Western Kimberley region of northwestern Australia. This artwork is said to date back at least 4,000 years, if not earlier. The similarities between these figures painted somewhere around 2000 BC are undeniably similar to how we would perceive a grey alien being in the modern world. They clearly depict, for example, a head larger than their frame would suggest, as well as a pale, white-grey skin and larger black eyes. Did creatures such as these visit the ancestors of the Wandjina tribe thousands of years ago? While the depictions could be nothing but coincidence, we have to accept that these ancient people would have drawn exactly what they saw. Were the people drawing what we would recognize as a grey alien in the modern world? We should note that perhaps researchers as well as members of the Wandjina people themselves reject the notion that these cave paintings represent alien entities, and instead claim they are simply representations of nature and the natural world their ancestors were surrounded with. It isn't merely the artwork, however. Many of their creation stories are similarly thought-provoking. For example, the first Wandjina people were said to be sky beings or spirits from the clouds, who came to Earth from elsewhere in the Milky Way. Ultimately, they created Earth and all life, both animal and plant life, before eventually returning to their cosmic home elsewhere in the galaxy. Before leaving, though, they would teach humans the secrets of the arts, science, astronomy, and agriculture. Clearly, all of these aspects of the creation stories of the Wandjina people resonate almost perfectly with multiple other civilizations from around the world. Could this suggest that the legends of the Anunnaki, extraterrestrials who came to Earth millions of years ago, are the origins of these multiple creation stories, each one spawned as these alien colonizers spread ever outward, bringing their teachings to those who they found on the way? With these suggestions of alien connections to the Wandjina people, it's probably worth examining the legends of the supreme deity Jama and his apparent use of a flying machine. For example, in one location where this advanced vehicle arrived and left from, there was a baldness of the surrounding rock and trees that had severely damaged bark. What's more, when this vehicle came and went, it brought with it a monstrously loud noise. It's clear even to a skeptic that from a modern perspective, this could very well be describing a nuts and bolts aircraft, and a highly advanced one at that. And it's also worth recalling that multiple other cultures and civilizations around the world have similar legends of entities arriving from the sky in vehicles, or sometimes depicted as animals that make a brilliant noise upon arrival and whose flames often cause damage to the ground when arriving and leaving. It's also of interest to note that many UFO reports from Australia today feature the detail of a particularly loud noise when they're viewed. Might this suggest that whatever extraterrestrial presence was in this part of the world thousands of years ago still be here today? Could it be, for reasons unknown to us, that Australia is of particular interest and importance to these extraterrestrial visitors, maybe for its location, or resources perhaps? It's also worth mentioning the Black Mountains that reside directly east, almost in a straight line on the other side of the country. Not only do these multiple black slabs make up the mountains there, slabs that could very well be the ruined remains of an ancient spaceport, but many pilots who fly over the region experience multiple issues with their navigation equipment. Might these ancient mountains be a further testament to an extraterrestrial presence in Australia in the distant past? What is of further interest to those who believe ancient extraterrestrial contact with the ancestors of the Wandjina people is more reality than myth are recent archaeological discoveries that would appear to corroborate at least certain Wandjina legends. Perhaps the best example would be the discovery of the remains of megafauna in the region. This matches very well the accounts of extraordinary large mammals in the Wandjina legends that state once shared the land with them. What's more, while mainstream scholars suggest that the northwestern parts of Australia were likely populated as far back as 60,000 years ago, the result of migrating peoples from Africa, the remains of objects at some sites in the region, suggest an origin that goes much further back to around 175,000 years at the very least. In fact, some researchers have suggested dates even earlier than that. With this in mind, we should also turn our attention to the work of Professors Alan Wilson and Rebecca Kane. In their paper, The Recent African Genesis of Humans, they would conclude that all human life could be traced back to the African continent somewhere around 200,000 years ago. However, not long after releasing the paper, they would publicly declare they had been wrong in their original conclusions and that their most recent findings suggested that the origins of Homo sapiens go much further back than people had previously thought, sometime around 400,000 years ago. And what's more, these origins began with the Aborigine people of Australia, who arose from two distinctive lineages. Even more conclusive, as far as Wilson and Kane were concerned, is that proof of these origins was not present in just one or two locations, but in at least 10 different sites. There is much to contemplate from Wilson and Kane's conclusions and how it might tie in with the creation stories of not only the Wandjina people, but also others around the world, all of which would appear to stem from one original source, those of the Anunnaki. If we accept that the Anunnaki, as the legends state, created humans by mixing their DNA with the most prominent humanoid on the Earth to create a worker race, might that genetic manipulation program have taken place in what is today Australia? Might Australia essentially have been the Garden of Eden of biblical myth? It is certainly an intriguing speculation. Could Australia have much more of an active involvement in these potential events of the distant past than many might have thought? Was there a possible Anunnaki presence here in this part of the world, and might it be they who influenced the guided of the Wandjina ancestors of the Wandjina tribes? Could the origins of the Wandjina really be extraterrestrial in nature? And do many cave paintings in the northwestern regions of Australia look like grey alien beings because that is exactly what they are? And might these grey aliens and the Anunnaki be one of the same? And if this is true, what does it mean for other similar creation stories around the world, as well as world history in general? Might such seemingly crazy notions of an extraterrestrial race coming to Earth thousands of years ago and then spawning a global human civilization, one that would in turn spawn the many civilizations of our ancient times, have more accuracy and truth to them than most would even dare to believe? We often find that ordinary, even sleepy places are home to some of the most disturbing and blood-curdling legends anywhere on the planet. Although it is perhaps little known outside of the United Kingdom, the Stocksbridge bypass that links the cities of Sheffield and Manchester is said by some to be one of the most haunted stretches of road in the world. There have been multiple reports from motorists of figures appearing in the middle of the road in front of their cars, often causing accidents and crashes. The strange sightings began almost as soon as construction of the road did in 1987. Several construction workers would report hearing the sounds of children playing and running around the temporary living quarters of the crew in the middle of the night, while two security guards witnessed a large, robed figure watching them before their car began to shake violently. Also in England, we can find another scenic location home to unsettling legends. For all its open country and greenery, Meon Hill in Warwickshire has long had connections to the occult, dark magic and witchcraft. In fact, at least according to local legends, those who practice the so-called dark arts still use the rollright stones that can be found nearby as a meeting place today. These stones, incidentally, are said to be the remains of an invading Danish king and his army, who were turned into stone by a witch in order to stop his advance. The creation legends of Meon Hill are also interesting. It's said that when Evesham Abbey was first built, the devil launched a great clod of earth towards it. The Bishop of Worcester, St. Egwin, was said to have used divine powers to halt the approaching clod of earth, sending it to a nearby field and creating what we now know as Meon Hill today. If we make our way across the Atlantic Ocean and to the state of New York, we can find many ghosts that are said to reside in the otherwise pleasant Gay Street. Some people have reported hearing the sounds of children playing on the street even though it's empty, while others claim to have seen unsettling figures half hidden in the shadows. Although strange incidents occur on the entire street, it appears that number 12 Gay Street is a hub of these spooky goings-on. The property attracted the attention of many paranormal investigators, perhaps notably Hans Holzer, who conducted several investigations in the house in the 1960s. The mysterious property continues to be of interest to paranormal researchers and enthusiasts alike. If we stay in New York for a moment, in Staten Island, we'll find several paranormal hotspots in what appears to be an epicenter of such activity in the Empire State. And what's more, these reports of mysterious activity go back hundreds of years. For example, many strange figures and apparitions have been seen at Snug Harbor almost as soon as pilgrims arrived in the region. Similar sightings are on record of two of Staten Island's oldest buildings, St. Andrew's Church and the St. George Theatre. Without a doubt, though, some of the most unsettling reports of bizarre activity come from the Conference House, perhaps not at least as it was erected on ancient Native American burial land. It was built by an officer of the British Navy, Christopher Billop, whose legend also states he stabbed a young maid to death not long after its completion. Her spirit is said to roam the house today, as well as those of long-dead British soldiers. Surrounded by the Mississippi River, Deer Island in Mississippi is one of the strangest locations in the United States, with several bizarre legends and reports of anomalous activity to its credit. These incidents began to be reported in the early 19th century as fishermen local to the area, using the island as a launch point to catch their hauls, began to spread such tales among the wider population. One such anomaly was a ball of blue fire that would appear and move over the surface of the water that became known as the fire-water ghost. It was witnessed by multiple people and is still reported today. Although rarer, there are also reports of a headless skeleton that calls the island home. It is said to be the spirit of a pirate, whose crew choose to decapitate him so that his soul could keep watch over their treasure. If there was any treasure on Deer Island, incidentally, it doesn't appear to have been found. An unassuming-looking stone bridge in San Antonio, Texas, is home to one of the most harrowing legends of the Lone Star State, those of Donkey Island. According to local legends, this unsettling woman was severely burned in a fire in the 1950s and left with horrific scarring to her face as a result. In fact, so horrific were these burns that her husband left their home shortly after. Alone, she found little help from the local community and eventually ventured into the woods, not to be seen again. However, over the decades that have followed since, there have been many apparent sightings of this hideously scarred woman, who was quickly referred to as the Donkey Lady around the city. And what's more, many residents local to the area insist that there's at least some grain of truth to this most disturbing legend. A little further west in the state of Nevada is Pyramid Lake, one of the most stunningly beautiful locations in all of North America. The legends that exist here, however, are anything but. It is claimed that the entire lake area was cursed by the Paiute tribe following a ceasefire in 1860 between themselves and European colonialists, a war that would result in hundreds of the tribe losing their lives. Following this, settlers soon began reporting seeing strange figures on or near the water, as well as the sound of children coming from under the water, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. As well as all these unnerving encounters, many people have vanished in or around the water, never to be seen again. Many of whom have been professional outdoors people and who have often disappeared in suspicious circumstances. California is home to some of the strangest, darkest secrets in the United States, one of which is the strange albino creatures of Hicks Road in San Jose. It is said that these white-skinned albino entities reside in the thick woodlands that surround the area, seemingly in small hut communities away from the townsfolk. However, given that they replenish themselves on human flesh, they often appear on Hicks Road, looking for an unsuspecting motorist to lure their way. There are many reports from those lucky enough to have gotten away from the apparent cannibals of being chased in a battered pickup truck that attempted to run them off the road. Others report having found abandoned vehicles at the roadside, their owners nowhere to be seen, assumed to have been victims of this mysterious and seemingly deadly albino tribe. The legends are so ingrained in the population that some motorists refuse to drive along the road at all. Another similar stretch of road in California is awash with mysterious and dark legends. Dyer Lane in Alberta, Sacramento. The road stretches for around a mile and is home to reports of figures appearing out of nowhere, as well as rocks being thrown from the roadside by seemingly invisible entities. According to legends, the origins of this paranormal activity go back to the mid-1800s, when the road was nothing but land owned by the Dyer family, where they lived on their ranch. One evening, however, after discovering her husband's infidelity, Julie Dyer seemingly lost her mind. She murdered their young children before butchering her cheating husband. In absolute despair, she then took her own life. Their oldest child returned to the home later that evening. After discovering all of his family dead, seemingly at the hands of his mother, he set the farmhouse on fire, so the circumstances could not be discovered. Since then, the Dyer family are said to roam the land in torment. As opposed to a road or a lane, the entire town of Antioch is awash with paranormal encounters, so much so that many people consider it not only the most haunted town in California, but in the entire United States. This seemingly picturesque town can be found just outside of San Francisco and has reports of bizarre encounters stretching back to the early 1800s at the very least. Many dark figures have been seen near the entrance to the Black Diamond mines, for example, including that of Sarah Norton, who was knocked down and killed there at the start of the 19th century. There is also a strange witch-like woman who some people claim to have seen flying or floating over the marina. These encounters continue to be reported today. Many of us might very well be surprised at the sheer volume of unsolved mysteries over the centuries that remain without any kind of rational explanation, and these range from the intriguing to the harrowing. Perhaps a good place to start would be with one of the oldest mysteries of all. Does the Holy Grail exist, and where might it be today? Some people believe the relic was recovered by the Knights Templar and hidden in France or even Scotland following the Crusades of the 12th and 13th centuries. Others suggest that Joseph of Arimathea himself brought it to Glastonbury in England in the early 1st century. One of the most intriguing suggestions, though, is that the Holy Grail resides in the Valencia Cathedral in Spain. And what's more, this ancient relic is hidden in plain sight, being put on display twice a year. Many people point to the fact that this mysterious cup is made from a type of stone that is only found in Israel. On the evening of the 18th of June, 1178, Gervase of Canterbury, along with 4 other monks, witnessed a bizarre aerial anomaly that remains unexplained. According to his writings, the 5 men saw a split in the moon, continuing that from the midpoint of the division, a flaming torch sprang up. Spewing out over a considerable distance was fire, hot coals, and sparks. He would further write that the celestial body appeared to throb and writhe in the night sky, and did so for around an hour. It is perhaps tempting to suggest the monks saw a UFO event that evening, although it is much more likely that they witnessed a meteor pass in front of the moon and so causing the throbbing effect that gave the impression it was split into two pieces. Some researchers have even suggested that the monks could have witnessed a meteor crash into the moon, causing the Giordano Bruno lunar crater. Without doubt, one of the grimmest unsolved mysteries for us to examine is the Child Eater of Bern, whose origins appear to stem from a mysterious fountain sculpture in the Swiss city that dates back to 1546. This monstrous-looking sculpture features what appears to be a giant who is carrying a sack with 3 children in it while seemingly eating another child. What perhaps makes this statue all the more mysterious is that nobody is quite sure who erected it or why. There are, though, several intriguing legends that offer an explanation. One is that the giant is a depiction of Duke Berchtold, the brother of the founder of Bern. It's claimed that Berchtold was envious of his brother's success and ultimately resorted to kidnapping children from the town. Perhaps a more likely explanation is that the giant was a contemporary depiction of Kronos of Greek legends, who ate his children so that they would not threaten his rule. Ultimately, however, just who the Child Eater of Bern might have been in reality remains unknown. The Clarendon Dry Pile, sometimes referred to as the Oxford Electric Bell, is, according to the Guinness Book of Records, the longest continually running battery in history. And given that this device continues to work today exactly as it does when it was first installed in 1840, that record grows daily. 2 brass bells were put in place underneath a dry pile that was then completely insulated with molten sulfur. These piles would appear to charge and attract the bells, causing them to ring. Just how and why the bell continues to ring today, over 180 years later, remains a complete mystery. And given the risk that investigating the bells themselves would cause them to cease working, the only option open to scientists is to wait to see if the battery will simply run out or whether it will continue forever. In the small town of Sandown in the Isle of Wight in the United Kingdom, there is perplexing legends of Sam the Sandown Clown. And this legend goes back to a specific day in May 1973 when 2 young boys were playing in the hills of the countryside. They suddenly heard a bizarre sound that seemed to come from a bridge nearby and immediately made their way to it to investigate what the sound was. When they got there, they discovered a bizarre being who was around 6 feet tall with a large head and pale white skin. Initially, the creature ran from the children, but then returned and apparently introduced himself as All Colours Sam. One of the young boys would describe the strange being as looking similar to a clown, which the media then seized upon in terms of naming this obscure entity. Although there have been no apparent sightings since, the legend of Sam the Sandown Clown lives on. When Commodore, a horse belonging to a teenage girl named Cursed Jensen, was discovered wandering near the Tukakuri River in Napier, New Zealand on the 1st of September 1983, it began a mystery that endures still to this day. Investigations would reveal that only a short time earlier, Jensen was seen with the horse near the river mouth. What's more, she appeared disheveled and with some blood on her face. Of even more concern, some people recall she was being restrained at the time by an unknown man. 2 years later, a man named John Russell confessed to killing the teenager, but he retracted his confession a short time later. Ultimately, he was never charged, and the whereabouts of Jensen remain a harrowing mystery, as does the identity of her potential killer. Arguably, what makes the apparent disappearance of Scottish musician Licorice McKenny strange is how few people appear to know about it. McKenny found fame with the folk band The Incredible String Band in the late 1960s and early 70s. However, after returning back to Scotland in 1986, she seemingly disappeared from the face of the planet, with the last known communication with her being 4 years later in 1990. According to journalist Mark Ellen, the last actual sighting of her was in 1987 when she was seemingly hitchhiking across the Arizona desert. In more recent times, there have been claims that the one-time musician is living somewhere in California. However, none of these sightings have been confirmed, and there has been nothing heard from Mackenzie herself. The encounters of Heidi Weirich are arguably some of the most mind-blowing and bone-chilling on record. When she was a young girl, she and her family moved into a new house in the town of Ellerslie in the state of Georgia. Almost immediately, she began speaking of conversations she had had with an old man she said was called Gordy. To begin with, Heidi's parents believed that their daughter had an imaginary friend. However, when she told them of a man who had appeared in the garden with blood on his shirt, a man she said was named Con, her parents suddenly feared that someone was attempting to kidnap her. It would eventually come to light, however, that Gordy was the owner of the house before the Weirich family had moved in, James Gordy, who had recently passed away. Even stranger, Con turned out to be Lon Con Bachelor, who had owned the property before Gordy. Heidi continued speaking to these apparent ghosts for several years. When her mother became pregnant, though, several years later, Heidi began to express fears of an evil spirit who had begun appearing to her. Even stranger, she and her father would find claw markings on their bodies, as if they had been attacked in the middle of the night. Scientists took a genuine interest in the case, but have been unable to offer any kind of explanation. While piloting a 747 plane from Hong Kong to Alaska in 2014, Christian van Heist began to hear chatter on air traffic control radio about a volcanic eruption in Iceland, as well as simultaneous earthquakes in San Francisco and in Chile. It was as he was listening to this exchange when a sudden bright green flash lit up the sky in front of him. To his amazement, Van Heist witnessed a beam of light that appeared to come from the ground and into the sky. Around 20 minutes after the flash, Van Heist witnessed a red glow ahead of the horizon. He would liken them to how a forest fire would appear from the air. Some people have suggested an eruption of an unknown volcano somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. And while this is perhaps likely, to this day, just what was witnessed by the experienced pilot remains a complete mystery. While it is perhaps more of a conspiracy than a mystery, there is a belief by many of the residents of Raini, a small village in the Himalayas in India, that Cold War-era nuclear spy devices that have since exploded were responsible for a huge flood in the region in February 2021. The general claims that the United States worked with the Indian government to allow mountain climbers to work undercover and plant devices that could spy upon the activities of the Chinese. However, the following year, the team involved were unable to locate the devices and their whereabouts remain unknown, as is whether these devices are responsible for some of the most damaging floods in the village in history.